War is raging all over the world, and one country stands to benefit more than most: Russia. We already know that Moscow has direct military ambitions. The nearly 2 years of war that it's brought to Ukraine is evidence enough of that. But what many don't realize is that Russia's most direct play for power and territory is far from the only card in its hand. The country is actively working behind the scenes by taking advantage of conflicts in other regions to strengthen its geopolitical position without having to raise a finger. Putin is being much smarter than many people give him credit for. He's using war to justify Russia's presence in other countries and cleverly using a proxy to solidify Moscow's position in some regions. And if all goes according to his master plan, the world may need to worry about more than just the potential issues caused by Russia taking over Ukraine. We might be seeing the rise of a much more influential Russia, one with more power and presence than it's had since the fall of the Soviet Union. These political power plays are Russia's secret weapon as it works toward becoming the world's most prominent superpower. The first of those power plays comes from the most recent conflict to erupt in 2023, the war between Israel and Hamas. Israel's battle against Hamas has pulled American focus away from what Russia is doing in Ukraine, at least partially. Washington finds itself in the unenviable position of having to support two countries, Ukraine and Israel, with military funding and diplomatic support. That's good news for Russia. The more that the US spends, both in terms of time and money on Israel, the fewer resources it has available to keep an eye on what Russia is doing. Realistically, the fighting between Israel and Hamas won't distract the US from Russia's invasion of Ukraine too much. It'll still send money and equipment, as it has for most of the conflict, because it wants to maintain its role as a global peacemaker while ensuring that Russia's anti-West rhetoric doesn't translate into direct territorial gains. However, this new focus on Israel will mean that the US will likely not pay as much attention to Africa, which could benefit Russia in ways we'll explore later. Beyond the US, the war between Israel and Hamas also brings China into play. It typically maintains a diplomatic strategy of neutrality with a leaning toward the creation of a Palestinian state. Russia seems to follow that same line of thinking. For that reason, Putin has two ways to approach this conflict when it comes to China. He could strengthen ties with Beijing by joining it in a call for a ceasefire and the eventual formation of a Palestinian state, allowing Russia to portray Putin as a peacemaker where the West failed. Alternatively, he could simply allow China to simmer in its attempts to maintain its semi-neutrality, leading to the country getting so bogged down in its efforts to foster peace that it pays less attention to what Russia is doing elsewhere. Either way, this would be a victory for Moscow. Less focused eyes on the Kremlin means that Russia can expand its interest elsewhere. And right now, the war that may benefit it the most is the one that has flown under the radar for many in the West: the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. This war has raged for almost 35 years, starting in 1988 when Armenians living in the Nagorno-Karabakh region demanded it be handed over to them when Soviet-era Azerbaijan collapsed. These demands weren't met, leading to tensions boiling over to the point where war broke out between Armenia and the post-Soviet Azerbaijan. The fighting was bloody and brutal, only ending, at least officially, in 1994 when the Armenian forces took control of Nagorno-Karabakh and 7 nearby districts. The unofficial Republic of Artsakh, formed in 1992, took power with Armenian backing, leading to the displacement of about 1 million people as well as causing thousands of deaths. And sadly, the fighting didn't stop there. Between 1994 and 2000, the new line of separation between Armenia and Azerbaijan hosted skirmishes and fighting that constantly threatened to restart the war. Drone strikes ensued, Armenian special forces were called in, with violence intensifying during April 2016, which saw 4 days of fighting that led to the deaths of hundreds of troops on both sides, serving as a warning of what was to come. The worst was yet to come, though, as all-out conflict broke out in September 2020. That's where Russia came into play. After 6 weeks of fighting, Russia brokered a ceasefire between Armenia and Azerbaijan that ostensibly brought an end to the conflict in the region. In truth, Russia had been playing a careful and deliberate game. It had sat back and watched as the Nagorno-Karabakh underwent constant instability, waiting for an opportunity to re-involve itself after it lost power in the area after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Brokering this ceasefire was a way to diplomatically re-establish itself in the region, and the Kremlin knew that the uneasy peace would not last. If anything, tensions only grew stronger. According to Crisis Group, the conditions negotiated in part by Russia led to a new front line that only separated opposing troops by between 30 and 100 meters. Previously, there had been several hundred meters of separation, making border skirmishes much less likely. military positions were placed along these front lines, with Russia just so happening to set up peacekeeping outposts along many of the main roads across the conflict zone. Russia had established its presence in the region, as well as its support of Armenia. All it had to do now was wait for the inevitable. War broke out again on September 19th. Azerbaijan launched a lightning offensive, occupying Nagorno-Karabakh in the process. The separatist authorities it installed quickly announced that the ethnic Armenians currently running the territory would be removed from power by January 1, 2024. Within a week, about 80% of the territory's Armenian population had fled, leaving Nagorno-Karabakh in Azerbaijani hands. The Republic of Artsakh was also dissolved as a result. On the surface, that seems like a loss for Russia. After all, it had declared itself an ally of Armenia. Surely the loss of Nagorno-Karabakh to Azerbaijan means that Russia no longer has a stake in the region, right? Well, think again, because Moscow has constantly encouraged controlled chaos in the region, doing little to resolve the conflict in either direction besides ostensibly acting as a, quote, peacekeeper. As for its alliance with Armenia, ask yourself this question: why didn't Russia step in to support Armenia so that Nagorno-Karabakh would remain under its control? Part of the reason likely comes down to propaganda. Though Russia is allied with Armenia, its media has constantly blamed its prime minister, Nikol Pashinyan, both for the constant state of the war in the Nagorno-Karabakh region and the losses that Armenia suffered. According to SWP Berlin, Russia's also laid the blame for limited intervention from Moscow on Pashinyan's doorstep. It claims that his favoritism to the West makes it difficult for Russia to act as an ally when Armenia is working so closely with the United States. Speaking of the United States, Russia also has the opportunity to label them as a failed ally. It's made its opinions on Armenia's prime minister clear, but with the fall of Nagorno-Karabakh, not only can Moscow claim that it could have done more with a more pro-Moscow prime minister in power, but it can also undermine American support within the country by painting them as a useless ally. The intention is to sow seeds of discontent within Armenia, which would potentially benefit Russia. Insecurity created within the country's population could lead to a prevailing opinion that Armenia can't survive as a state without Russia's help, possibly leading to a future election resulting in a Moscow-friendly prime minister coming into power. In short, Russia might have given up its influence in the small Nagorno-Karabakh territory to further increase its influence in Armenia. And don't forget about Azerbaijan in all this. That country's president, Ilham Aliyev, is well aware that Russia could have ended his attempts to reclaim Nagorno-Karabakh at any point. The fact that they didn't isn't a sign of Moscow's weakness, it's a message: we allowed you to do this, but you will only retain Nagorno-Karabakh if we continue to let you. Russia, having already created vulnerability in Armenia that could lead to dependence on Moscow, is now trying to do the same thing in Azerbaijan. Suddenly, Russia's lack of intervention in Nagorno-Karabakh starts to make sense. And that's without mentioning the unrecognized state of Transnistria, or the Moscow-backed state of Abkhazia. Both are nervous following the fall of Nagorno-Karabakh to Azerbaijan, and they have a good reason to be. In Transnistria's case, Russia's support for the country has diminished in recent years, according to Cambridge Economic Policy Associates, or CEPA. The organization calls Transnistria a satellite state, discussing how the establishment, though unofficial, of the Republic of Artsakh in Nagorno-Karabakh helped to prop up Transnistria's claims of statehood. But in the wake of the Ukraine war, Transnistria has found itself increasingly dependent on the European Union and the country from which it wishes independence, Moldova, to survive. Russia still has a presence there. The London School of Economics says there are 1,500 Russian peacekeepers in the region. But those, quote, peacekeepers are more of an obstacle than they appear. They're primarily in the country to guard an ammo depot in a small village named Kobasna. Additionally, their presence is considered a threat to Moldova's sovereignty, making it harder for Transnistria to maintain diplomatic relationships and cooperation with the country that's still officially recognized as owning it. Perhaps Russia's lessening support is sending a message to Transnistria: if you continue to rely on Western powers, we won't help if Moldova decides to try to take you back. And what's more, the LSE reports that Transnistria relies heavily on subsidized gas from Russia, which fuels its industrial sectors as well as its public electricity. What would happen if all of that went away? It's not a question that Russia is asking directly, but Transnistria has to be nervous after seeing how Armenia's increasing cooperation with Western countries led to Russia not intervening in Nagorno-Karabakh. The same goes for Abkhazia. As recently as August 2023, the Georgian separatist region said that it remained a steadfast ally of the Russian Federation, but it would not allow itself to be annexed by Moscow. It wishes to remain independent, but interestingly, Politico says that this declaration came in the wake of hints dropped by Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, that Moscow might look to absorb Abkhazia in the future. Abkhazia would push back against this annexation, but given that the Kremlin already has military bases in the region, along with about 5,000 troops according to the Center for European Policy Analysis, the breakaway republic would be at an immediate disadvantage if Moscow decided to annex it. And again, the propaganda would come into play. The West did nothing to help Nagorno-Karabakh. Why would it help you? Wouldn't it be better to be welcomed into the warm embrace of the Kremlin's bosom? Through a combination of support, withdrawal, and using Nagorno-Karabakh as an example, Russia is creating more uncertainty in some of Europe's most vulnerable regions. And if Putin plays his cards right, all of that uncertainty could lead to an increase in anti-West sentiment as Russia positions itself as the only option for Armenia, Azerbaijan, and even several small separatist states that have traditionally relied on it for support. So it's clear that Russia's European ambitions stretch beyond Ukraine. It's also clear that Russia is using propaganda and its support to enhance its power base in other countries. The fact that it gets to subtly damage the influence of powers like the United States, the EU, and even countries like Moldova and Georgia is just the icing on the cake. Now let's turn our attention to Africa and the actions of the Wagner Group. Founded in 2014 by Yevgeny Prigozhin, Wagner is a mercenary force based in Russia. Though such groups are technically illegal, according to the BBC, Wagner got around this law by switching its designation to private military company in 2022. But even before gaining the public prominence it enjoyed since the start of the war in Ukraine, the group had evolved into one of Russia's most powerful foreign policy weapons, essentially acting as a proxy for Moscow for conflicts in which Russia didn't want to get its hands directly dirty. And after the death of Prigozhin in a plane crash following his very public falling out with Putin, Wagner has fallen increasingly under the Kremlin's thumb. Brookings points out that Russian intelligence services are in the process of breaking down and absorbing Wagner's structures. Affinity for Prigozhin will be weakened while the alliance to the Kremlin will strengthen. In essence, Putin has taken de facto control of Wagner, and in doing so, he's now in prime position to take advantage of what Wagner had been doing over the last few years. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, the group has been especially active during the Ukraine conflict, as well as on the Syrian battlefields, but its main focus has been on Africa. The Wagner Group has maintained a presence on the African continent since 2017, offering military support and security services to several countries. But those services and support come at a price. The countries in which Wagner is based often just so happen to strike deals that are favorable to Moscow. Concessions are made, access is granted to natural resource deposits, and the result is that Russia often uses its supposedly third-party security force to enhance its influence on the African continent. The group has had an immense impact already. Take Libya as an example. In 2019, Wagner entered Libya to provide support to Khalifa Haftar as he assaulted Tripoli in an effort to oust the country's internationally recognized government. Haftar now rules much of the eastern portion of the country, with continued support from Wagner, and he's setting about doing what all good dictators do, installing his family in leadership positions. According to France 24, all 6 of his sons now hold positions of military or political power, ensuring his family stays on top long after Haftar is gone. Wagner's involvement in Haftar's rise didn't go unnoticed, with Haftar also being well aware of Russia's role in his rise to power. He's even met Putin. Al Jazeera reported that he traveled to Moscow for talks as recently as September 2023. If Haftar is going to gain full power in Libya, removing the current United Nations-backed administration in the process, he'll have Wagner to thank. And that's perfect for Russia, who would be able to lean on Haftar to establish a stronger presence in Libya whenever it wants. Wagner also maintains a presence in the Central African Republic. According to Reuters, Wagner entered the CAR in 2018 to support its government as it fought a civil war that had been going on since 2012. But of course, the conflict hasn't ended. The Coalition of Patriots for Change, or CPC, formed in 2020 and has spent the last 3 years launching attacks against the CAR's government forces. That's great news for Russia because it means it's able to justify its presence in the CAR via Wagner. As recently as this year, the Russian ambassador to the country told one of Moscow's state-owned newspapers, RIA, that there were 1,890 Russian instructors in the CAR a strong presence underpinning Moscow's support for the CAR's government. But of course, that support comes at a cost. It's believed that Wagner received control of one of the CAR's gold mines for its contributions, as well as logging rights in the country, with both likely contributing a decent amount to Moscow's budget now that the Kremlin essentially controls Wagner. Add that to the increasing influence Russia can exert because of its support of the CAR's government, and you get another growing support base in Africa for the Kremlin. The Wagner Group's tendrils also extend to Mali. In January 2023, France's President Emmanuel Macron announced the country's decision to exit Mali. That was huge news, with all 2,400 of the troops France had stationed in the country leaving by August 15th that same year. But what was even bigger news is that Wagner was making its presence known in the country before the French exodus, with the removal of France's troops only serving Russian interests further. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, the Wagner Group first started showing up in Mali in December 2021. The move was instantly condemned by many of Mali's international partners, including the United States, but that didn't change the situation. Mali still needed help. Its government was, and still is, fighting against Salafi jihadists in and around the Sahel region, all while France slowly scaled back its military presence, only worsening the situation. It was only a matter of time until Mali turned to Russia for help, and through Wagner, Russia delivered. Wagner mercenaries arrived to provide its typical security services for Mali's senior officials, as well as deliver training to its troops, but just as we saw in the CAR, the price Mali paid was increasing Russian influence, and according to the CSIS, several mineral concessions. Wagner has certainly made its presence known in Mali. According to a report published in The Guardian in May 2023, Wagner was identified as the group behind the deaths of 500 in the Malian village of Moura. Supposedly, Wagner invaded the village because it apparently hosted al-Qaeda operatives, but according to UN reports, the group was at least implicated in the torture, rape, and killing of hundreds. Even with the condemnation of this attack, Wagner entering Mali is yet another victory for Russia. Not only does Moscow get to extend its influence to another country, forcing yet another to rely on it for security, but it did so while also removing France's influence on Mali. Given Russia's anti-West rhetoric as of late, that's a substantial side benefit as it can position itself as the Malian government's savior in light of its, quote, abandonment by one of the West's most prominent countries. And then there's Sudan. A country with one of the most violent recent histories, Sudan's been embroiled in civil wars for much of the last century. The country's first civil war raged from 1955 to 1972, highlighting the divide between the north and south of the country. Though an uneasy peace reigned for about a decade thereafter, a second civil war broke out in 1983. This conflict drew in fighters from eastern Sudan, the Blue Nile, and the Nuba Mountains, eventually ending in 2005 after much bloodshed. But even then, the Sudanese problem wasn't solved. Just before the country's second civil war ended, the war in Darfur began. This time, the conflict was focused on Sudan's western region, lasting from 2003 until the signing of a peace agreement between the Sudanese government and various rebel factions in August of 2020. The Wagner Group entered the picture at some point in 2017. According to CSIS, Wagner entered Sudan in December of that year to provide military support to the country's then president, Omar al-Bashir. And again, that support came at the cost of concessions. Moscow struck a deal through a subsidiary, M-Invest, to mine gold in the country, and even when al-Bashir fell to a coup in 2019, Russia remained flexible and even managed to offer support to a 2021 coup that introduced a government more favorable to its ambitions. Now, civil war rages in Sudan once again. April saw renewed clashes between the Sudan Armed Forces, or SAF, and a paramilitary group called the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. These groups, which had worked together with support from Wagner to orchestrate the 2021 coup, fell out over the plans to integrate the RSF into the SAF, and again Sudan is plunged into chaos. Russia, of course, continues to lurk behind the scenes. If an April 2023 report by CNN is to be believed, Wagner has started to supply the RSF with surface-to-air missiles that could aid in overthrowing the SAF, essentially staging Sudan's third military coup in about 5 years, all with Russian involvement. Furthermore, a CNN-published satellite imagery of Libya around this time showed an unusual increase of activity in Wagner bases, showcasing how Moscow's managed to build its influence in the region. Again, it is clever work by Russia. Moscow's throwing its support behind the group it believes to most likely come out on top in Sudan, creating the dependence we see it creating in other countries, Only in Sudan, the stakes are even higher. Not only does influence over Sudan give it access to gold mines in the country, but it also opens up the possibility of building a naval base in Port Sudan. Plans for the base were actually agreed upon in 2020, and it would host up to 300 personnel while finally giving Russia access to the Red Sea. Given the recent war in Sudan, that base now hangs in the balance. But it's clear that Russia is betting on the RSF through Wagner's work, and it'll be able to leverage Wagner's support into increasing influence should the RSF take power. So what have we learned from all of this information? Propaganda and proxies have combined to deliver stronger footholds in Europe and Africa, as well as decreasing reliance on Moscow for support. That's his secret weapon. If he doesn't invade directly, he makes countries so reliant on Russian support or so fearful of the lack of it that they'll bend to his will. Has the West been ignorant of these moves for too long? Do you think Putin's machinations will play out, giving Moscow influence over more territory without its army getting directly involved? Tell us what you think the future holds for Russia with its secret weapon now revealed below. Now watch, could alliance of China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran destroy NATO? Or check out this video instead.